But then I should quickly make sure I thank Shravan for this extraordinary initiative. I think it's a really timely thing to have a meeting like this and an initiative like this. And I do hope that this builds into something impactful and mutually beneficial. So my name is Girish Kulkarni. I'm a member of the faculty at the TIFR in Mumbai. My area of research is astrophysics and cosmology. And I have been asked today to talk about the role of computation and machine learning in cosmology. So cosmology is astronomy at the very largest scales that the human mind can comprehend. Okay, we are talking about hundreds of millions to billions of light years. And it turns out astronomy can be done at those very large scales. And about 100 years ago, almost everyone quite reasonably thought that we little humans will never be able to see the whole universe. But it turns out that at those very large scales, you can begin to study the whole universe as one physical system. So you can ask questions about the physical properties of the whole universe as one physics system. And in the last 5 to 7 decades, miraculously, we have learned a lot of things about the whole universe very precisely. So this is encapsulated by this cartoon diagram by an American group, in which the basics are shown. For example, we think that the universe is 13.6 billion years old. It started in an event called the Big Bang. It had a rapid phase of expansion, which created the various particles of which produce normal physics. And then at some point, stars and galaxies formed, which we see around today. Now, what's interesting about cosmological research is the ubiquitous usefulness of computation, because this picture, this cosmological model that we have discovered in the last several decades is very nonlinear. So almost every single question that we ask requires doing numerical calculations. And the video on this slide shows an example from a really large simulation by the group at Carnegie Mellon University in 2015. So you can see this is an artificial universe being created under certain physics hypotheses inside a computer. Where is cosmology today? Cosmology today is an intensely active field of research. And in my opinion, the next decade is going to be focused around these 5 big questions in the field. We want to understand what drives the Big Bang, what drove the Big Bang, what are the dark mysterious things called dark matter and dark energy, how did first stars and the intergalactic medium evolve, how do exotic objects like supermassive black holes form, and we want to understand how gravitational waves, which have been now discovered, can be used to study cosmology. Now, the reason things are very bright and exciting is because these questions are accompanied by the development of large astronomical facilities which can get data that are useful to answer these questions. So I'm showing 4 on this slide. The SKA observatory in Australia, which will detect radio data, the LSST experiment in South America, the TMT facility in the United States, and LIGO, the gravitational wave telescope, which will soon have an Indian arm. And these 4 experiments are historic, epoch-making facilities coming up very soon. But I'm highlighting these 4 because they are of immediate interest to the Indian community, but the list goes on to cover about 10 or 15 more facilities. So there's a lot of data coming our way, which should help us to answer those 5 questions that I have highlighted as sort of a consensus direction. The workflow of a cosmologist is like this. You use these astronomical facilities to design an experiment, which essentially involves collection of data optimized to rule out given physics hypotheses about the universe. The experiment runs, produces some raw data, which you convert to usable data, usable summary metrics. This will involve a lot of data processing. Then you go to the theory side and you develop models of the same summary metric under certain assumptions about the universe. And finally, you do the inference, in which you confront data and model to either rule out or constrain your model. So for example, if you have your favorite new model to explain dark energy, your prediction might be that that model will form certain patterns in the galaxy distribution on the sky. And then you will design an experiment to measure that pattern. And then you will model that pattern using large cosmological simulations, and you will compare those 2 patterns using some statistical inference technique to check if your hypothesis is successful. So that's what cosmology is. Okay. And now to discuss how computing and machine learning plays a role in this game, I will focus on the last two stages of this flowchart because that's my area of expertise, the modeling and the inference part. So when we talk about modeling in cosmology, the central task is to solve equations of gravity, fluids, radiation, and magnetism. That's actually just the task. Sometimes these equations come from conventional physics. Sometimes they come from non-conventional new physics models. And the technical, say an example is shown here in this animation, a large, I think a very large cosmological simulation that we published a couple of years ago from my group. Now, the traditional way to do these calculations is to use very large numbers of CPUs and GPUs over MPI. Okay, very traditional HPC setup. A unique challenge, though, in cosmology, which I think probably is not shared by other science discussions that are happening today, is dynamic range. Cosmological computations are unique in that they require very large scales and very small scales to be simultaneously present in your calculation of these nonlinear differential equations. And that makes the problem very large. It has to be spread over gigantic supercomputers. But the task doesn't end after simulation. After the simulation, you should also process the simulation data to get those summary metrics that I alluded to, which you have to compare to the data. And so monthly budget in this business can be easily millions of CPU or GPU hours and petabytes of data. That's the modeling side. On the inference side, constructing one model is not enough. You have to construct multiple models spanning very large parameter spaces, sometimes going to hundreds of dimensions. And then you have to figure out a way to traverse these parameter spaces when you do the inference and compare models to data. Currently, this is mostly done using poorly understood interpolators and the traditional MCMC. As Shravan pointed out in his beginning remarks, this is woefully inefficient, but this is sort of the standard of the field at the moment. And the problem is there are ubiquitous parameter degeneracies, which you have to be very mindful about. I think that is another respect in which it differs from industrial applications of machine learning. Okay, so the summary is that both inference and modeling are extremely compute intensive tasks. Now, this is where machine learning has been helping. Cosmology got machine learning techniques only about 10 years ago, but there are three applications which have revolutionized certain areas of cosmology thanks to machine learning. The first is increasing the dynamic range by speeding up just traditional computation using emulations and interpolations using machine learning. Okay, so that's just constructing super resolution, high dynamic range calculations. The second is to target the large parameter space problem. And machine learning techniques like CNNs have allowed maximum information extraction and rapid marginalization on nuisance parameters, which you can't ignore while modeling, but you don't want them at the end of the exercise. And finally, machine learning has also helped in the deal with the problem of the diversity of data sets, lots of telescopes, lots of experiments, and the domain adaptation methods seem to be showing great promise there. So this is the current level of machine learning in cosmology. For our industry partners in the audience, I should point out that cosmologists started by just importing what the industry had developed on machine learning, but we have done innovations ourselves. Our first contribution to machine learning was to adapt techniques to cosmological datasets, which are usually not 2D images, for example, of tigers, but spherical 3D datasets. And I've listed some neural network techniques which were developed in cosmology in my first point on this slide. Machine learning was then adopted to cosmological time series. Again, this has been a very fruitful literature, again, native to the cosmological community. And finally, the latest trend has been explainable AI and symbolic regression. This is showing great promise, and a lot of discussion is happening there. So that's the future, in my opinion, of machine learning from the cosmology side. But I should highlight one respect in which machine learning has failed to please cosmologists, and that is the area of uncertainty and bias quantification. Okay, in industry often, point estimates of various parameters is enough, right? You just have to mark a message spam or not spam, for instance, and so on. But in astrophysics and cosmology, you need interval estimates. You need a confidence interval. You probably need to understand degeneracies. And so traditional regression is not of much interest. Okay. And so there are various techniques available. But this has been the main challenge. I just want to flag it there for any discussion. Cosmologists have therefore liked things like approximate Bayesian techniques, which actually have started moving into the industry. I will end by quoting the recent decadal survey of astronomy that the American community has published. And these are 3 verbatim sentences from their report. This is what is used by the US government to fund research in this area. And you will see that it really highlights the role of machine learning and computation. Cosmologists have started publishing in machine learning journals and conferences. And I think, in my opinion, the 4 concrete points of synergy probably worth discussing in the afternoon are sort of computing resources, algorithmic development, software engineering, and human resource. And I think there have been efforts, industry academy synergies in cosmology in each of these 4 points, which I can discuss later if there is interest. And I should again apologize that I was not there physically. So if someone wants to get in touch with me, I'm more than happy to talk one-on-one. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Girish.